Lack of medical personnel. Before the war in the western Ukraine under Polish government, Ukrainians had a few abilities to become a doctor. Higher education institutions had quotas that limited the number of students of Ukrainian origin. So medical practice was more often carried out by Poles and Jews. That is why, when the Ukrainian Insurgent Army began to conduct active hostilities with the Nazi and Soviet occupiers, it was decided to actively use Jews to establish medical affairs in the WWII. Jewish doctors were kidnapped along with their families from German ghettos and offered to help rescue wounded rebels in exchange for protection from the Germans. And they, of course, agreed. Here are the stories of several of them. The Violinist. When the Germans started shooting Jews, I quit my job and hid until May 1943. Then they came for me from the WWII. My wife and property were taken to the hospital in the forest, where I worked as a doctor until August 9, 1944. Was spoken during interrogations by the NKVD in 1944 by the well-known WWII doctor Varmshaya Davidovich, nicknamed the Violinist, who practiced in Volyn. During this time, I healed more than 200 riflemen wounded in battles with Germans, Poles, and Red partisans, as well as with NKVD units. During interrogations by the NKVD, Violinist noted that the WWII guys first looked after the Jews so that they would not run away, but later, when they proved their loyalty, they worked without supervision. The Soviet scum fiercely hated Ukrainian soldiers because they fought for an independent Ukraine state. Their very existence put an end to the lie about the fraternal Russian people and Ukraine's voluntary accession to the USSR. In addition, the rebels themselves had no illusions about the Bolsheviks, understanding that a good occupier is a dead occupier. The communists repressed and killed even the families of the rebels. So for the fact that Davidovich cured more than 200 Ukrainian rebels, he received 20 years of exile from the Soviet punishment institutions. There is a version according to which, at the request of the super-popular Soviet radio presenter Yuri Levitan, Dr. Davidovich was released from prison much earlier than the term. In general, this Jew enjoyed great respect among the rebels because of his high qualification as a doctor. WWII intelligence officer Helena Kohanska wrote in her memoirs, "Varma was a good doctor who performed complex operations in bunker conditions. He played the violin perfectly, which he never parted with. He received the call sign, Violinist. When there was a free moment, the rebels gathered in the forest clearing, invited Varma, who played for them. Everyone loved and protected him. By the way, the wife of Violinist, Esther, was a nurse with him." Valerie. Individual Jews, due to hopelessness, went to the rebels of their own free will. For example, Leba Dobrovsky, from the end of 1941, worked in the political department of the WWII. He is the author of a number of nationalist leaflets, brochures, and appeals. Among the most famous, appeals to Uzbek, Tajik, Armenian, and other peoples. Valerie was also the author of the brochure, How the Moscow Tsar Conquered the Nations. The Jewish rebel was arrested by the Soviet Special Services on February 1, 1944. Samuel Neumann. Being a doctor from Stry, he joined the WWII after the Nazis sent his old mother to the ghetto in 1941. Not wanting to leave her there alone, he went to the ghetto after her. But through his acquaintances in the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, of whom he had many, he asked to save them and deliver to a safe place. The very next night, members of the security service of the organization kidnapped the doctor together with his mother and took him out of the city using forged documents with the surname Maximovich. While he practiced under this cover in various areas of the region, the Gestapo learned his real name, and the security service network was forced to hide Neumann. In September 1943, he was transferred to the WWII West, where he worked as a doctor and teacher at a foreman high school. Mom was always by his side. Neumann died in the Black Forest, along with other members of the WWII headquarters, during the Bolshevik offensive in July 1945. Godfather. Due to hopelessness, a Jew later nicknamed as Godfather also joined the WWII. The Nazis destroyed his entire family, and fleeing death, he wandered the outskirts of the Carpathian villages until he faced the rebels. UIA soldiers took him to their base, and after several checks allowed him to treat the wounded. Later, Godfather became very popular among the rebels. He is still the only Jew who received the Silver Cross of Merit from the UIA leadership. However, he was awarded posthumously, as he died in the winter of 1946 in a rebel hospital, and the award resolution was issued on May 30, 1947. The hospital in the Black Forest, where he was staying, was exposed by the Soviet Special Services. Shooting along with wounded rebels, Godfather shot himself in the forehead when the situation became hopeless. Before that, the rebels offered him to leave the ranks of the UIA and enter a legal position, because the Soviet authorities offered such an amnesty. By the way, according to the testimony of Ukrainian soldiers, many Jews took advantage of this. But he refused. He explained his refusal to talk to the wounded Bohdan Podolyak, who was being treated in his hospital, as follows. After the arrival of the Germans, I found myself in a hopeless situation. They shot all my relatives. I managed to escape, but there was nowhere to hide for a long time. And at the time of my hiding, when it seemed that not only people, but also God deprived me of his care, you gave me protective shelter. Your organization saved my life. And I sincerely admit that I cherished life then. I was afraid of losing it. Now tell me, don't I have anything to thank for? I feel the duty, maybe not that, of a Ukrainian to Ukraine, but of a person to a person. My heart aches for that Jewish loyalty, the reason for which, of course, is stateless life. Therefore, I value the will, that true will, and am ready to fight against those who trample it. It is not only in your interest, but also in our Jewish interest. The State of Israel was created 2 years later, the State of Ukraine 45 years later. In addition to doctors, the UIA had Jewish, tailors, horse caretakers, and soldiers. In the forests of Nazi-occupied Ukraine, there were big groups of Jewish refugees hiding from death. Rebels usually tried to use them somehow. In June 1943, a unit of the UIA military district Zagreb, under the command of Dubovi, while raiding the Sarny region, encountered 40 Jews in the forest, most of whom were women and children. By order of the commander, Jewish families settled in the Stepan region near Kostopil. All the necessary living conditions, livestock, clothes, shoes, and tools, were given. Instead, Jews sewed clothes, shoes, and harvested the rebels. And UIA soldiers guarded the Jewish settlement from Nazis. In the Black Forest, the rebels helped the Jewish doctor Abraham Sturzer create an independent Jewish partisan unit that operated near Stanislaviv, provided weapons, food, and ammunition, and instructed local villagers to deliver clothes and food to the Jews. For such a service, Sturzer treated wounded rebels and sick villagers in the surrounding villages. Already after the war, Sturzer, being overseas, wrote that thanks to this, he, his brother, their wives, family, and other Jewish acquaintances managed to survive Nazi terror and persecution and remain alive. Separate divisions of the UIA gathered Jews in the forests and set up entire camps from them, where everyone had to work according to their profession or in agriculture, which was under the protection of the UIA. Such camps could number 100 to 400 persons.